Assalamu alaikum. I'm Dr. Abdallah Rothman, and I teach on the online Islamic Psychology Diploma here at Cambridge Muslim College. This program is designed for practitioners of psychology and counselors who want to ground their work in an Islamic paradigm. The work that they do on this diploma is not only working on how to implement this with clients, but also in their own development as therapists. So in addition to their academic study, they engage in a process of murabata, of inner reflection and diligent working on themselves, because this is a primary focus for an approach to Islamic psychology that we teach, that the state of the therapist is important. So this is part of their study in addition to the books and the academic. So we have the students engage in supervision sessions, they have self-reflective journaling, murabata journal that they do throughout the year, and they're practicing on themselves what they're learning to do with clients. So one of the frameworks that we use in this process, both as a tool for working with clients and working on themselves, is Al-Ghazali's, what is commonly referred to as the 6 memes, or 6 M's. And this is from the book Kitab al-Muraqaba wal-Muhasaba, from the 38th book of the Ihya Ulumuddin. And what Al-Ghazali outlines in this book is what amounts to a practical framework for doing this process of inner growth and reflection, not just from a state of self-awareness, but actual accountability and changing one's actions and state. And so the way that Ghazali outlines this process, it has relevance in today's modern approaches to popular psychology, but it is much more advanced and sort of unparalleled in its completeness and effectiveness. So the book is called Kitab al-Muraqaba wa Muhasaba, and it's translated in English as Vigilance and Self-Examination. But these two aspects, basically these 2 M's, Muraqaba and Muhasaba, are 2 of 6 that he goes through that fall under another M word called Murabata. And so you could say that the book really is about this path of Murabata. And the 6 M's fall within this category. And so Murabata means steadfast commitment. And the Murabitun are those who are mounted and ready for battle. And in this case, the way that Al-Ghazali is using it is that the battle that he's referring to is the battle inward, the battle of the soul. And being mounted and ready for this battle is having the willingness and preparedness to constantly be engaged in the work on the self. So the Murabit is one who battles against their own inner self in this jihad an-nafs. So like the Prophet ﷺ, when they were coming back from the battlefield, he said, we're going now to the jihad al-akbar, the greater battle. And this is the engagement with the self, and it's something that is ongoing, that we need to engage in all of the time, because this is primarily what we're here to do. And so this is a tool that we can use as a really, I would say, sort of high technology in helping people become self-aware and being in a state where they can actually change what is within themselves. And this starts with the therapist doing this on their own heart, working on their own nafs. And so the 6 M words are musharata, muraqaba, muhasaba, muwaqaba, mujahada, and mu'ataba. And these 6 sort of states are, Al-Ghazali in the book splits them into sort of 4 categories. One is preceding the act being, let's say, something that you're engaged in that you should be bringing attention to work on yourself, right? So sometimes we have patterns, we fall into bad character traits or behaviors, or presenting problems even psychologically. And so before this act is musharata, and this is agreeing upon the conditions, and we'll talk more in depth about what that entails. And then the second phase that he separates it into is accompanying the act. So this is while it's happening, you're watching yourself. And so this is muraqabah. Muraqabah oftentimes is translated as meditation. In this case, in this book, it's translated in English, it's translated as vigilance. But you can think of muraqabah as watching the self. So it's paying attention to yourself as you're going through these things. And then the third sort of phase that he separates out to is following the act. And this is muhasabah, self-examination. So this is after you've seen yourself, you've watched yourself, now you're taking note, taking account, and bringing awareness to study, collect data to move forward. The rest of the 3 M's fall into the fourth category of responding to the act. And so this is muaqabah, which means sometimes it's translated as punishment, but I like to say consequences, much like you would do consequences in disciplining a child with love for the benefit of change. And then the fifth one, within this fourth category though, is mujahada. Mujahada, in this sense, he's meaning it as renewed striving. We'll talk more about that. And this is a process of now you're responding to not just having self-awareness, but putting this into action. And the final 6th one within that 4th category is mu'ataba, which means self-censure. This is where we're coming and we're actually changing our response to things, changing what is within ourselves, changing behavior, changing our mind, our thinking, and changing our inner state. So, musharata, the first of the 6 M's, this means agreeing upon the conditions. So what are the conditions that we are agreeing to? Basically, it's the intellect, our aql, our capacity for rational thought, and this aspect of the aql that ties our way of orienting, setting the conditions for our soul. So this is musharat nafs. This is setting the conditions for the soul. And it's about directing the soul, so the whole soul. So we talk about nafs, ruh, aql, qalb, but really looking at the inner reality of the human being. And the person is directing itself to be aware of the circumstances with which it becomes heedless. Okay, so we're using our intellect and our intelligence to be aware of what this situation is, that we tend to fall out of remembrance of Allah, we tend to fall into ghafla. And so Ghazali says that this starts with the 7 members, the eyes, the ears, the tongue, the stomach, the genitals, the hands, and the feet, and that these are all doorways or pathways to the heart, because these are the ways that we engage with the dunya. And so they're like receptors where we take things in, right? And we engage. It's also the same places where we make wudu, where we purify to protect ourselves and purify our intention to keep focused on this, on Allah in this process of purification. And so what he's saying is we have to be conscious and aware, and in this stage, before the act, it's understanding the conditions that this happens, that when we engage in dunya, it affects our inner state. And so we first need to just be aware of these conditions so that we know how we fall out of balance. And he talks about, Al-Ghazali references Umar ibn al-Khattab, who said, call yourself into account in comfort, or while you can, before the accounting is severe. So before you're in the day of judgment and being held responsible for everything that you've done, we should be taking ourselves into account now. And so this is why this bigger process of self-examination is so important. And beforehand, it's understanding the terrain and becoming sort of alert to the lay of the land. So we're being aware of the anatomy of ourselves. This is why knowledge of the soul and what that is and how we interact, how we understand ourselves is so important to understand how we can become affected. And then just knowing that our inner self, that we have this inner state of our heart that can be corrupted from engagement with the dunya, and that we have a responsibility to do work to purify. So that, just understanding the conditions that we have responsibility. And knowing that we came with this pure soul, from this moment of alastu bi rabbikum, we were in witness, this became veiled, and so understanding that this is the setup that we're in here in the dunya is keying us into what to be aware of. And that our limbs, the ways that we take in, is how this can be affected. So then, the second stage and the second of the M's is muraqabah. And this is again translated as vigilance in the English translation, but I think watching the self is a way to understand the meaning of this. And this is a state of self-awareness, where you're in the moment watching what you're doing. You're witnessing yourself engage, react, respond. And you're sort of monitoring your actions as they happen, right? So we're watching ourselves as we do it, which we tend not to do. We tend to go into autopilot in our lives, and we sort of just take things for granted, we act, and oftentimes we're looking to external things for responsibility, and we're not sort of watching ourselves. And so Al-Ghazali is saying the reason we need to be watchful of ourselves is recognizing that everything is seen, nothing is hidden from Allah. Right? Allah sees everything to the smallest and even our hidden intentions. And so based on that, we need to strive to stay aware and be willing to expose ourselves and be vulnerable before Allah. Because we already know that Allah sees these things, and we want to not delude ourselves and hide from our own inner truth, which as human beings we all tend to do. And so this is exposing ourselves for the benefit of this process of jihad an-nafs and purification. And so you'll recall that the hadith where the angel Jibreel, when he was defining ihsan, he said to worship Allah as if you were looking at him. And then the Prophet ﷺ said to worship Allah as if you see him, and if you do not see him, know that he sees you. And this is this state of recognizing that everything is seen by Allah, and that you're constantly in the presence of Allah, so it makes everything that we're doing important enough for us to take this serious, take ourselves into account and act upon it. That there's nowhere we can hide, and we don't want to delude ourselves and cover over this truth. And not going into autopilot, because when we do that, not only do we hide from the truth, but it disconnects ourselves from Allah. And this is how we can come into imbalance in our mind, body, and soul. And this has impact not just religiously with sort of cleaning our heart, but this is how we come into having sort of all kinds of different psychological issues and imbalances and patterns. And so if you can think of this state of nafs al-muraqabah, is the state of the nafs, the self, when it is watching itself, and it's vigilant. This is why the word vigilance is used about everything. It's not taking everything for granted, and it's being a witness to your own self interacting. You can imagine like a cat waiting for a mouse outside of a mouse hole. If you've ever seen a cat, they're extremely patient, still, waiting for this movement to pounce, but they're completely in the moment, aware of what's transpiring in the moment. And so this is bringing this conscious awareness into the moment so that we can be responsible and take account for ourselves as we're seeing it.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for learning with us. At Cambridge Muslim College, we are raising the standard of Muslim scholarship through talks like these, but also through our certified academic programs. We're training our students to speak to our times and to meet the needs of our communities. But we can't do this without your help. Whether it's zakat, a one-off donation, or a regular contribution, your gift will help us educate more students, elevate new leaders, and illuminate entire communities for generations to come.
I want to read a passage from the book where Al-Ghazali talks about this aspect of observing and watching ourselves. So he says, he should observe what appears to him and what actually gives rise to his thought. Is it for God in particular, or does the passion of the soul or adherence to the devil give rise to it? This should cause him to pause and settle it until it is revealed to him through the light of God. So this is a really important passage. The reason why I read it is because a lot of people ask, well, if we're being self-aware and we're doing this self-introspection, how do I know what is from my own nafs or from shaitan and what is right guidance, or how do I know what I should be following? And this comes from the more experience that we have of watching ourselves. The more time that we spend studying our habits, our patterns, our downfalls, our pitfalls, then we have more data to understand how to go about this and start to understand what is from me and what is from something else. So there are khawatir, or notions that come into us, but there are different types of khatir. There's khatir al-nafs, that's coming from your own self. There's khatir al-shaitan, that's coming from shaitan influencing. There's khatir al-malaika, so angels can sort of put notions into heart. And there's khatir Allah, we can receive direct guidance. This is what Ghazali is talking about, is the light that Allah reveals to you. And this is what we want to get to, is to spend enough time paying attention to start to, over a period of time of doing this, be able to discern what is khatir shaitan, what is khatir nafs, and how do I clear this, get this out of the way so that I can be receptive and open to this light of Allah illuminating to see what is, right? To see things as they are. And so the more that we engage in this process that Al-Ghazali is laying out for us in these 6 steps, or these six states, we can increase the potential for us to be able to discern this and take action. So self-awareness is not just this passive, okay, I see, but it's taking account. And so the next M, the third one, is muhasaba. Now this is in the category of after the act. So now you've watched yourself. So the act being, we have all kinds of things that we can potentially be observing in ourselves throughout the day. And so once you realize, okay, I see my reaction to this pattern. When this person said this, I had this nafs reaction where I became angry. So I need to look at myself. I've noticed now that I got angry. That was the muraqabah. Now after the act, I take the time to examine myself. And so we often hear about muhasabah, like maybe in a journal, you're writing down things. And this is because Al-Ghazali talked about it as an accounting of the soul. So you're examining yourself and you're taking things into account. He says much like an accountant would at the end of the day. And the reason why this is important is what we're doing is we're engaging the aspect of our nafs, the nafs al-lawama, where we're taking ourselves into account. And this is really where our salvation lies. This is where we have the ability to change what is within ourselves, is by taking ourselves into account before we're taken into account. And this is how transformation can happen. This is where the sort of crux of the transformation of us being able to actually change our state, our heart, and our limbs following. We'll always make mistakes, right? We are made to forget. The human being is always going to fall and forget. We have this nafs al-amara, this aspect of ourselves that inclines towards forgetfulness or inclines towards evil inclinations, and we have to constantly be engaged in being able to turn and change our state, because we always have this opportunity for tawbah, for turning back to Allah. And we have to take the responsibility of taking ourselves into account. And in recognition that when we are in ghafla, it opens an opportunity for us to turn to Allah. So it's not something that we should be upset about. We should accept that we fall, but that when we fall, when we forget, it's an opportunity to remember. And when we remember, we're actually the closest to Allah because we're choosing to remember Him from the darkness. We're turning to His light within the darkness. And this is the process of how we become what our potential is, inshallah. And so, like Al-Ghazali talked about this as an accountant at the end of the day, sort of balancing the scales, at the end of each day we should be doing this. We should be looking at our day, saying, what did I do, studying it so that we are taking ourselves into account and so that we have information for how to take this forward the next day where we can try and be better. And this is how this process of the rest of the 6 M's loop back into one another. And what we want to do is take the opportunity before the opportunity passes, because we never know how long we are going to have. So it's a constant process. So now that we have gone through the first 3 steps, the rest of the 3 M's are in this category of responding to the act. So this is where we change. We actually do something to act on it. You know, they say knowing is half the battle. So now the other half is putting this battle into action. And that means actually being able to change your state. So the 4th M is muaqaba, which often gets translated, like I said, as punishment, but I think consequences is a better way to look at this. It's taking action that's going to balance where you have slipped. So after you've done this self-examination, you respond by disciplining the soul and enacting reform. You're not just sort of recognizing it, letting it go. You first sort of take punitive measures, not in a sadistic way, but in a loving desire for yourself to grow, to maximize its potential. Much like you would discipline a child that you love for their benefit, for their sake. And similar to consequences that we use with children, we want to sort of train them, almost giving them a taste of the bitterness of the consequences, so that we know not to fall prey to our lower tendencies again. And that often the consequence sort of matches the punishment matches the crime, as they say. So, for instance, if you found yourself overindulging in food, we have this tendency to overindulge in food, and we know that the Prophet ﷺ said we should have our stomachs 1/3 water, 1/3 food, 1/3 air, not to take more than we need. So when we recognize that this is a part of ourselves going in this direction, then we could, as a consequence, muaqaba, we would fast, right? Sawm. We fast as a way to put the balance, and it's this purification process, but it's also teaching us to rein ourselves back, right? And so this is sort of responses that we can use to train our nafs. Now, the 5th M is mujahada. And here it's being used in this way of renewed striving. And these Ghazali talks about as voluntary acts of worship. So particularly looking at emulating the practices and the behaviors and the state of the Prophet ﷺ and our righteous predecessors, and seeing how they acted, how they took on extra worship and spiritual practices in this struggle against the soul. And this can give us this renewed sense of striving. And it's motivated by witnessing our own infallibility and our need to reform, but not relying on our own resources, right? We're knowing that left to ourselves, we tend to be weak, we tend to follow our nafs, and so we need to look to others that are better than us. And this is a crucial aspect of not only having guides, this is why we have the Prophet ﷺ as a guide to follow. Ideally, also, we spend time around people who are righteous, right? This is the blessing of having learned people who are not just learned by books, but their state. They have gotten to a place of purification in their heart, and they're emulating the character of the Prophet. And this can not only sort of rub off on us in osmosis, but we have a model to look to influence our own ways by mimicking their ways and their states of being. And if you don't have people like this accessible to you, if you do, you should seek them out. Even traveling to see these people is of benefit. But if you don't, then looking to the accounts of our righteous forebears is really important in this stage. And this is why we read the Sirah, this is why we learn about the companions and the different ways that they were striving, right? So the beauty in the companions is you have all these different personalities, all these different types of people, but they're all following the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and being engaged in this path of murabata, of striving and in this internal struggle against the self. And so this can be a motivating factor for us. And then finally bringing us to the sixth M, and this is mu'ataba, and this means self-censor, so censoring the self as it happens, right? So this is taking action, and it's this ongoing pursuit of reproaching the self, keeping yourself in check, and changing your behavior. So you're going back and seeing what you would have done before. Now you are actually holding yourself back and acting differently this time because you have gone through this process. You have this self-knowledge, and now you're putting it into action and changing not only your state, but your reactions and behaviors. So the meaning of mu'ataba is not being content with oneself. So it's not just sort of being complacent. Oftentimes we can know what our downfalls are, but not do anything about it. This is why they say knowing is half the battle. The other half is actually taking action. And so it's this mu'ataba, this commitment to continued striving, never being satisfied with your state. You're always as mounted and ready for battle, as a murabit. Because our nafs is constantly in flux. We respond and react to things in the dunya, and our heart is fluctuating. Our nafs is, we can be down sometimes, we can be feeling good. It's natural that we fluctuate, and so we have to stay constantly engaged so that we can bring some balance to this fluxing. And this is why we remain vigilant, and we need to sort of continue in this process of trying to maximize our potential to continue growing and becoming. And this situation is really a blessing from Allah, that we're set up in this way of fluxing and forgetting, but the possibility of remembering is that Allah has put us in a position where we have to do our part to engage in witnessing Him, turning to Him, and changing what is within ourselves. And we're striving to our highest potential in this path of murabata. And so this is the type of work that is fundamental to the Muslim, fundamental to the human predicament. And when we're looking at psychology of the development of the human being, psychology is the study of the soul. So literally in this process of the 6 M's, it's not only studying the soul, but actually engaged in the development of the soul. And this is very much what an Islamic paradigm of psychology is. It's not just recognizing the anatomy of the soul, but putting it into engagement for transformation. And that as a person who is learning to be a practitioner of this, to help people connect to the tradition, to find this guidance for the process of development, it is fundamental that the person is doing the work on their own heart, because this is how this process sort of transfers and transmission is two people being mirrors for one another in this process of reflection as you both struggle to maximize your potential. So this path of murabata is one that we can take all of us can use as a tool in our own lives. And if you notice that it loops back progressively. So you have watched before the act, You watched yourself during the act, after the act, and then taking action, and then you come back to before the act again. Now you have new insight to look at what the conditions are and to then, inshallah, keep sort of upping the levels of your development, because we always have more to work on. We always have more that we can be deepening in our work and cultivating our ability to see things as they are. Like this quote that I read from the book, where we want to get to the point where we can spend so much time engaged in this process that we can recognize what is from shaitan, what is from our nafs, and how we can find the guidance from Allah by uncovering all of the things that get in the way of perceiving things as they are when we are self-deluded. And so the more we are peeling these layers off and doing this process of purification, of tazkiyah, this is how we can recognize how to be in a state of submission to Allah. And this is how we enable change within the self. This is a method, and I would say a high technology of method of change when it comes to human psychology. And when you engage in this process, inshallah, you are able to shorten the time that you're in a state of ghafla. Because we will slip, we will forget, but then the more that we practice this, we're able to catch ourselves in the moment and then purify and take a different course of action to change ourselves. And so this process of change is the path of the murabit, and it's what we're here to do, to engage in this inner struggle of the soul. If you enjoyed this lecture, I would like to invite you to join me for an interactive live session, and you will have the opportunity to have your questions answered. We'll engage in dialogue, we'll engage with other students, and you'll get a taste of what it's like to be in a class at Cambridge Muslim College, and we'll take this topic a little bit deeper and experience firsthand what it's like to be a student at the college. For more information on this and to register to attend, you can use the link in the description below, but you'll need to hurry because spaces are limited, because we want to keep it as a similar to a classroom environment. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.